There's a pattern in history that has overthrown three major governments in the last 250 years. Every single time, the people in power believed it could never happen to them. And right now in 2025, the United States is following that exact same pattern, stage by stage and grievance by grievance. Almost like we're reading from a script written in blood and chaos. In 1789, France was the most powerful nation in Europe, wealthy, cultured, and advanced. Paris was the centre of art, science, and philosophy. But within 5 years, the government was overthrown. The king was beheaded, and the country descended into the terror where 40,000 people were executed for political crimes. In 1917, Russia was a vast empire stretching across 2 continents. The Tsars ruled 180 million people. It looked unbreakable, but within 8 months, the entire regime collapsed. The Tsar was executed along with his family. The Bolsheviks seized power, and the civil war followed that killed more than 20 million people. In 1959, Cuba was one of the most prosperous nations in the Caribbean. It had tourism, casinos, foreign investment, and a functioning economy. Within 2 years, Fidel Castro overthrew the government. Private property was nationalized, opponents were imprisoned or executed, and the country entered a communist dictatorship that would last more than 60 years. 3 times, 3 revolutions, 3 moments when a seemingly stable government collapsed into chaos. And every time the people in power never saw it coming. They thought they were untouchable. They thought that people would never rise. They thought the system was too strong to fall. They were wrong every single time. And right now, every warning sign that preceded those 3 revolutions is present in the United States. Extreme wealth inequality, widespread government corruption, a collapsing middle class, and a total loss of faith in institutions. America is not heading toward the pattern. It is already in stage 4. And history says that stage 5 and 6 come fast. This is the story of how revolutions happen, why governments never see them coming, and why the math says that America may be next. Before we go through the pattern, you need to understand what a revolution actually is. A revolution is not a protest. It is not a riot. It is not an election. A revolution is when the existing system is completely destroyed and replaced, often with something far worse. Revolutions don't happen because people are poor. Poverty has existed for all of human history. Revolutions happen when expectations exceed reality, when people believe they deserve better than what they have, when the gap between the elites and everyone else becomes extreme. And most importantly, when people lose faith that the system can fix itself. When peaceful reform becomes impossible, violent revolution becomes inevitable. Those are not the words of a radical. They were spoken by John F. Kennedy. And history has proven him right every single time. France, Russia, Cuba. 3 different centuries, 3 different ideologies, but the exact same 6-stage sequence. Let's look at how it actually played out. Let's start with the mother of all modern revolutions, France in 1789. In the 1780s, France was the centre of European civilization. Paris was the cultural capital of the world. French was the language of diplomacy. The arts, philosophy, science, all flourishing. King Louis XVI sat on the throne. The monarchy had ruled France for 800 years. It seemed eternal and unshakable, but beneath the surface, the rot was total. This is stage 1 of every revolution, extreme wealth inequality. In 1789, France had 27 million people, divided into 3 classes. The first class, the elites, owned 10% of the land and paid no taxes. The second class, the nobility, about 400,000 people, owned 25% of the land and paid almost no taxes. The third class, the middle and lower class, 26 million peasants and workers, owned 65% of the land and paid all the taxes. And it wasn't just taxes. The nobility had privileges. They lived in palaces while ordinary people starved. By 1788, France was already breaking apart. A bad harvest caused bread prices to double, and since bread made up about 88% of a peasant's budget, millions could no longer afford food. While ordinary people starved, the nobility continued living in luxury and hosting lavish feasts at Versailles. The problem was not just inequality, but total government incompetence. King Louis XVI was weak and indecisive. France was bankrupt after years of war, yet the solution was always the same. Borrow more money and raise taxes on peasants, while nobles and clergy refused to contribute. When reform was blocked, crisis exploded. In 1789, the educated middle class turned against the system, declared itself the National Assembly, and challenged royal authority. Trust in institutions collapsed. Radical groups gained mass support. The king was publicly executed executed along with the Queen Marie Antoinette. And soon after, the nobles, priests, political rivals, and even former revolutionaries were executed in public squares. Tens of thousands were killed, chaos spread, and eventually Napoleon seized power. The revolution that promised freedom ended in dictatorship and war. Now let's jump forward 128 years. By 1917, Russia was a vast empire ruled by Tsar Nicholas II. Russia was massive, spanning from Europe to the Pacific. Stage 1. Extreme wealth inequality. The Tsar and nobility owned nearly everything, while peasants made up about 80% of the population and owned almost nothing. Even after serfdom ended in 1861, most peasants still worked on land they did not own and paid crushing rents. In cities, factory workers laboured long hours for starvation wages, often alongside children, with no safety laws. Meanwhile, the elite lived in palaces, completely disconnected from everyday life. Stage 2. Government corruption and incompetence. Tsar Nicholas II was a disaster, weak, indecisive, and completely out of touch with reality. He believed that God had chosen him to rule, and therefore no reform was necessary. In 1905, when some peaceful workers marched to the Winter Palace asking for better conditions, soldiers opened fire, killing hundreds of people. This massacre, known as Bloody Sunday, shattered public trust. World War I made everything even worse. Russia entered the war in 1914, and it was a catastrophe. Millions of poorly equipped soldiers were sent to die, officers were incompetent, and supply lines collapsed. Soldiers fought without bullets. Entire divisions surrendered because they had no ammunition. By 1917, Russia had suffered 3 million casualties. The army was deserting. The economy was collapsing, but the Tsar was still living in luxury. Stage 3. Middle class and military turn against the state. In early 1917, food shortages sparked bread riots in Petrograd. The army was called in to restore order, but the soldiers refused to fire on the crowds. They mutinied. When the army won't defend you, the government is over. In March 1917, Nicholas II abdicated, ending 300 years of Romanov rule. Stage 4. Loss of faith in institutions. A provisional government promised reform but kept Russia in the war. The soldiers wanted peace, the people wanted food, and the provisional government delivered neither. As a result, public faith evaporated within months. The provisional government lost legitimacy within months. They were seen as weak, incompetent, beholden to foreign powers. And into that vacuum stepped Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks. Stage 5. Revolutionary movement gains mass support. Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks promised 3 things: peace, land, bread, ending the war, and redistributing the elite's land to peasants. Their simple message spread fast among soldiers, workers, and peasants. Stage 6. Government is overthrown and chaos follows. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power. Civil war followed from 1918 to 1922, killing around 10 million people. The Chechnya, the secret police, executed anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activity. Entire villages were wiped out. In July 1918, the Tsar and his entire family were executed in a basement, shot and bayoneted, even the children. By 1922, the Bolsheviks controlled Russia, but the cost was catastrophic. 10 million were dead in the civil war. Famine killed millions more, and the economy was destroyed. The revolution that promised liberation delivered dictatorship, famine, and terror. Now let's look at the most recent case in this pattern: Cuba in 1959. This one surprises many people because Cuba was not a poor or collapsing country. In the 1950s, Cuba had one of the highest living standards in Latin America. Havana was wealthy, modern, and full of tourism, casinos, and foreign investment. On the surface, everything looked fine, but underneath the same 6 stages were already unfolding. Stage 1. Extreme wealth inequality. Most of Cuba's wealth was concentrated in Havana and among elites connected to President Fulgencio Batista. Outside the capital, especially in rural eastern Cuba, poverty was widespread. Sugar plantations dominated the economy, and much of the land was owned by foreign companies. Profits flowed to a small elite or out of the country. Rural Cubans lacked healthcare, education, and opportunity. The contrast between luxury in Havana and hardship in the countryside was impossible to ignore. Stage 2. Government corruption and incompetence. Batista came to power through a coup in 1952. He cancelled elections and ruled as a dictator. Corruption was everywhere. Police and courts could be bought. Political opponents were jailed, tortured, or killed. American mobsters ran casinos with Batista's approval, paying him a share. The state existed to enrich Batista and his allies, not to serve the people. protests were met with violence, creating deep anger across society. Stage 3. Middle class radicalized. Fidel Castro was not a peasant. He was a lawyer from a well-off family. Educated and ambitious, he could have joined the elite. Instead, he chose rebellion. In 1953, he led an attack on the Moncada barracks. It failed, and he was imprisoned. At his trial, he declared, "History will absolve me." Released in 1955, he went into exile and returned in 1956 with a small group of fighters. Most were killed, but Castro survived and regrouped. Stage 4. Loss of faith in institutions. Batista's brutality backfired. Every village burned and every student tortured pushed more people toward the rebels. Faith in elections, courts, and the army collapsed. Even the United States began distancing itself from Batista. Once foreign support faded, the regime's legitimacy vanished. Stage 5. Revolutionary movement gains mass support. By 1958, Castro's movement had grown rapidly. Peasants supported him. Urban resistance spread. Batista's army began to desert. Officers fled with stolen money. Stage 6. Government overthrown. Chaos follows. On January 1st, 1959, Batista fled the country and Castro entered Havana. At first, he promised democracy. Within months, opponents were arrested or executed. The press was censored and private property was seized. Cuba became a dictatorship that lasted more than 60 years. And here is an important message. The revolution never delivers what it promises. It delivers blood, purges, and new tyranny. Because revolutions are led by extremists, and extremists don't build, they destroy. The moderates who wanted reform were executed or exiled. The people who thought revolution would bring freedom, they learned too late that chaos is worse than corruption. Now let's talk about the United States in 2026 and why every historical warning light is flashing red. When you compare America today to France in 1789, Russia in 1917, and Cuba in 1959, the pattern is impossible to ignore. Stage 1. Extreme wealth inequality. In 1980, the top 1% of Americans owned about 8% of the nation's wealth. Today, they control roughly 32%, a level even higher than France before its revolution. The top 0.1%, around 130,000 households, now own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. Billionaires live visibly different lives. Private jets, mega yachts, space tourism. While millions of Americans cannot afford housing, healthcare, or education, many work 2 or 3 jobs just to survive. This gap is not just large, it is humiliating and impossible to ignore. And historically, that is where resentment begins. Stage 2. Government corruption and incompetence. Public trust in government has collapsed. Trust in Congress hovers near historic lows. Confidence in the Supreme Court is falling. Nearly half the country believes elections are unfair or rigged. Insider trading by members of Congress is rampant. Lobbyists write legislation. Corporations own politicians and nothing gets done. Infrastructure is crumbling. The debt is $36 trillion and climbing. Problems that should be solved aren't because government doesn't serve the people, it serves donors. When both parties are seen as corrupt and incompetent, when voters believe the system is rigged, faith in democracy dies. Stage 3. Middle class destroyed and radicalized. This is the most dangerous stage. The American middle class is being hollowed out. College education brings lifelong debt. Home ownership is out of reach. Healthcare costs bankrupt families. Wages stagnate while asset prices soar. Educated young people are worse off than their parents, despite doing everything they were told to do. When teachers, engineers, nurses, and professionals cannot build stable lives, they radicalize. Revolutions do not begin with the poorest. They begin with educated people who expected a future and feel betrayed. Stage 4. Loss of faith in institutions. This is where the United States is now. Trust in media, courts, police, elections, and federal agencies has fractured completely. Half the country believes the 2020 election was stolen. The other half believes January 6th was an attempted coup. Neither side trusts the other. Neither side believes the system is neutral. Institutions are viewed as political weapons, not shared foundations. When that happens, the nation stops functioning as one country. It becomes 2 populations sharing the same land, waiting for a trigger. Stage 5. Revolutionary movements gain mass support. This stage is forming. On the left, calls for wealth redistribution and system overhaul are growing. On the right, support for authoritarian leadership and extra-legal action is increasing. Both sides increasingly believe the system cannot be fixed from within. When moderates lose control and extremes gain momentum, this stage arrives fast. Stage 6. Government collapse and chaos. History shows what comes next. Political violence escalates, institutions fracture, security forces split, supply chains break, states defy federal authority, foreign powers interfere. What emerges afterward is rarely better. Often it is more brutal, more authoritarian, and more destructive than what came before. France, Russia, and Cuba all believed they were different, but they all all were wrong. The United States is now in stage 4, and history shows that once a country reaches this point, stopping the cycle becomes extremely difficult. The answers are not in the future, they are written clearly in the past.